my name is Sem and I am the London Assembly member for Hackney, Islington and Waltham Forest.
My name is Melanie. Hi, it's nice to meet you. My first question is, what do you think the links are between privatising council services and the frontline cuts and reduced resources for service users?
So I, as somebody who's a Labour Assembly member and also a Labour councillor, I'm very supportive of something called insourcing. I don't know if you've heard of that. That's where councils, where maybe in the past something has been outsourced and gone to the private sector to deliver a service, bringing that service back in-house so it's delivered by the councils. I think there's a lot more accountability for people who receive those services, and like you say, it's easier for I mean, obviously in the context of austerity, but it's easier for somebody to hold their council and their elected representatives to account and to push for increased services. And I think that there are situations where, for example, charities might offer services to councils and to members of the public. I think that should be encouraged, but I think ultimately that accountability is really important.
How could the CLA better improve the experiences of young people in and leaving care?
So I guess with young people leaving care, it's important that they have some kind of stability, and I know that's really difficult because you're under the care of the local authority, and a council is never going to be the same as your parents in the same way. But I guess one thing that springs to mind is making sure that care leavers are provided for in terms of their housing. I think that's really important. I think there's a really unfortunate cycle of people who are leaving the care system. If they don't have that support, they're more at risk of getting into situations which might lead to crime and criminality, and that is definitely a link that needs to be broken. And that also does exist around homelessness. Kind of stuff that I've read indicates that young people that are homeless have been through the care system. So I would think just
most of the time they put you on the homelessness.
Exactly. And so I think the Mayor of London has something called the London Plan, which is it's a spatial strategy for essentially what goes where. 600 pages, but kind of what goes where and who gets it. So houses, residential, commercial spaces, energy centres, everything that's built in London is kind of outlined, and it looks forward 30 years. And within that, obviously when the Mayor is funding housing, it might be, or just might raise it, housing committee, sorry. Just thought, as the Mayor is giving funding for housing, I think it's really important that he could maybe put pressure on local authorities to say the social housing that is funded through the Mayor of London's grants, some of that is set aside for care leavers, because I think realistically it's not, cumulatively it's a lot of people, but within each local authority it should be possible that new homes that are being built, maybe a percentage of them are allocated to care leavers, so at the very least they're able to stay where they have been living and where they were raised, and perhaps if they're in a position to do so, make contact again with their families or stay in touch with people that have been their peers and their friends in that area. And I also think with lots of the programmes that the Mayor of London's office does around employability, I think there's also possibly scope to kind of have some spaces set aside for those people that are in care or are leaving the care system, so whether that's apprenticeships or training opportunities or any other jobs that might be match funded by the Mayor of London's office or any of his programmes.
How do you think we as young journalists could better hold local authorities and the GLA to account?
I think it's really important to understand the political process, but I also think it's really important to understand the differences and what each body does. So you guys, we met at the Assembly when you came to Mayor's Question Time, and that is very different to the way a local authority would work. I think understanding things like, as much as you are journalists, you also are citizens and have the right to contact Assembly members and speak to them and ask them those difficult questions. I receive letters and emails every day from constituents, and I suppose one of the things that I would reflect on is that I very rarely get contacted by young people. I think probably in the time that I've been elected at the GLA, I don't think I have been contacted by any young people about issues that affect them. And so I do think that because of that, it's helpful as journalists to raise the profile of those issues that affect young people by simply putting the question. There are things that you guys have put together today, and I've had to go and think about because they're in the back of my mind, but because they're not kind of asked, it's not necessarily something that you would enter into a conversation about. And I do think that, for example, in terms of the Assembly, when you attended Mayor's Question Time, the second part of the plenary, the second part of that is where we take motions. And should any young people have motions that they want to be taken forward about issues that affect them, that process, understanding that process means that you're able to force a debate at the Assembly. And the same is true at councils. Speak to Ergun, who worked for an MP until last week. That similar process in Parliament about MPs taking up issues, and then just reporting on something which is really important to me, which is why I got angry the other day when I met you all, sorry, is just, it's really important, I think, to hold politicians to account about arguing on the facts. And that is something which is really, and I'll use the word again, unedifying for politics, for people to feel like what they say is being twisted for a party political purpose. And I understand, I'm a politician myself, I understand that there are different perspectives, but I think it's really important for you as student journalists to make sure that people are looking at the facts of a particular issue. So the question that Charlie raised earlier about young people and crime is really good indication of that. So it is the case that youth crime has gone up in London and it's gone up across all of England. But it is really making sure, but it has gone up from, and it's every single death is a tragedy. But those increases, we need to understand what are the causes of them and address the causes to ultimately make sure that goes down in an ideal world to zero. But make sure that young people are not at greater risk of crime from their peers than somebody that might write to me about any other issue.